Okay, hi everybody. My name is Michael Norris. I'm going to be your next reader. So we do have one more open mic session after I read, and then we have our final scheduled reader, which is going to be TQ Sims. So if anybody wants to join in on the open mic, let me know. I know we do already have Lily who will be reading. Is you still here, Lily? Yes, so Lily is going to be reading. Okay, so what I'm going to read y'all, I'm going to read you two different chapters from a book that I'm working on called The Eternal Jamboree. It's set in a post-apocalyptic United States where men and women are now living basically separately in most areas of the United States. I won't explain all that, but this is the moment that we meet the two main characters. So one chapter is where we meet one of the main characters, the other chapter is where we meet the other main character. So I'm actually going to start them out of order, and that's just what this is. So here we go. Chapter 7, Stories to Barter. He didn't know yet, but this was James's last day working his grandmother's fields. The scythe's brittle handle crunched in his fist with each swing of the rusty blade as it sliced through the wheat, mowing the tall plants to the ground. The blade had lasted longer than most, past the point that any honing would help. Still, the plants barely resisted his large swipes of their stalks. James knew the truth. He was becoming a man. Just as he finished his last row on the front field, grandmother appeared on the porch, a small figure in a blue gingham dress, waving. James dropped the scythe and jogged to the house. You never wanted to keep grandmother waiting. By the time he got inside, grandmother sat in the middle of the living room, using a rusty screwdriver to pry open the dusty black machine she once used to play her stories on the TV. The machine held round silver discs in them, discs grandmother switched out to change the stories. But they hadn't watched stories in almost a year, not since the crops didn't make and she'd stopped buying gasoline for the generator. Grandmother sucked her teeth, straining until the tray on the machine popped open. Finally, she said, more to herself than to James. Her veiny hand shaking, she plucked the silver disc from the machine and placed it into one of the clear, square cases she housed the stories in. A few of the cases had faded pictures and writing on them, telling what was in them. James knew the pictures, but the writing meant nothing to him. Grandmother looked over a jumbled pile of the cases on the floor, her face scrunched up like she was thinking hard. James knew enough not to bother her while she was concentrating. After a few moments, she grabbed 7 or 8 cases from the stack and arranged them with the ones she pulled from the machine. This'll do, she said, standing. Take these to the barter man at the clothing shop. Grandmother's eyes met James's. I'm going to need some credits to trade next month at the meet. James stared at the stack, worry seeping into his mind. Going to town to see a barter man didn't always go so well, especially since the bees stopped flying in the fields. Last time, the barter man at the pawn shop kept talking about how James was almost ready, squeezing his arms and eyeing him up. You never sent me to that shop before. I never needed their credits before, and I never needed your sass before neither. Am I getting to be a man, grandmother? Am I going up? You're the same size you've always been, boy. Grandmother shook her head and thrust the stack of stories out at him. James took the cases and pressed them to his chest. We'll get going now, grandmother said, knitting her eyebrows. Ain't nothing worse than watching you stand around where there's doings to be done. A crow flew off the roof of the house as the screen door slammed shut behind James. His feet moved fast over the dirt road, trying to push him quicker than any thoughts or fears he might be having. He raced into town, past the liquor store, past the dry goods store, down to the pawn shop. The clothing store sat next to it, a long, rain-warped shack with a rusty tin roof and just a few spots of old paint clinging on. A poorly painted sign out front that said, coverings, clothing, and casings, swung in the wind, thumping rhythmically against the building. James closed his eyes and pushed against the door with his back, hoping maybe no one was there. But instead of slowly turning on its hinges, the door flew right open, pulled fast from the inside by a tall man in a red plaid shirt. The clear cases spilled from James's hands and across the store's dirty black and white tiles, the man laughing a gritty, burly laugh. Jameis scrambled to pick them up, but a mud-covered boot clamped his right wrist down, freezing him to the floor. Blade Runner, Terminator, Iron Man. The barterman twisted his head as he read the words on the cases. What have we here? He lifted his foot off of Jameis's wrist and picked up a thick case just beyond the boy's reach. The whole fucking Star Wars series. All 6 trilogies. Guess your grandmother really wants something good, eh? Jameis slowly stood up, brushing his front and making sure not to look the barterman in the eye. He instead studied the grimy checkerboard floor, trying not to glance at the racks filled with clothes or the shelves stacked with what looked to be mannequin parts. Well, what does she want? The door creaked open behind Jameis and he heard grandmother say, I sent him to trade those stories for credits. Jameis turned to face his grandmother. She stepped in front of him, sucking her teeth. And of course, throw him into more trouble than he's worth. Grandmother, wait, The barterman grabbed Jameis from behind and covered his mouth with a gritty hand that stunk of oil and dirt. Jameis felt something poke him in the back and he fell limp. He's a pretty new model, she said. Probably worth a pretty penny in parts. They're always worth more in parts. The barterman dragged Jameis through a swinging door behind the front counter. He strapped Jameis to a table and grabbed a rotary saw from the wall. Jameis was numb, unable to move. The barterman flipped on the saw, a loud whir filling the room. He brought the spinning blade down against Jameis's right knee. Jameis watched as his leg shuddered and fell to the ground with a loud clank. But instead of blood and bone, wires stuck out from the severed limb. She didn't tell you, huh? The barterman chuckled and brought the blade down again. They never do. Okay, so this is going to be the actual first chapter in the book, where we meet the other main character of the book. Chapter 1, Curfew. Mary Sorgel hurried across the cracked asphalt road in front of the cinema, avoiding the grassy potholes out of habit. Buoyed by the hollow film she just watched, a re-showing of her favorite Eternal Jamboree, she didn't focus on being alone or on curfew coming. Instead, she replayed in her mind the final performance she'd just seen. The song had been breathtaking. The voice had been soaring. The singer had been beautiful. Erica Badgham, the winner of the 2057 Eternal Jamboree, was everything Mary Sorgel wanted to be. If she timed it right, Mary would be able to make it across the outskirts to her home near the outer edge in the 15 minutes before curfew began. The cinema sat as far as possible from Mary's house, backed up to the wall outside of Central City. The wall, a flat cement behemoth rising hundreds of feet into the air, separated Mary and the dullness of the outskirts from a teeming metropolis on the other side. Some girls she knew said that the cinema itself opened into Central City, that there was some sort of secret entrance behind the hollow screens, but Mary avoided that gossip as best she could. Talking too much about such things could get you in trouble. In any case, unauthorized entrance into Central City didn't end well. Everyone knew this. A monitor drone hovered behind Mary, far above the personal video drone she'd kept live streaming for the past 3 weeks. The monitor drone's buzz got increasingly louder as she navigated the tangled streets of the outskirts towards her home. She wasn't familiar with this part of the outskirts. She'd only been twice before to the cinema, once when she was 6 and once when she was 10. Unlike the section she lived in with individual homes a few feet apart, here the buildings were connected, 2 and 3 stories high and huddled together for block upon block, creating the feeling of a corridor whichever street Mary turned down. She couldn't be 100% sure of each turn, but Mary possessed a keen sense of direction. I'm going to be a star. I'm going to be a star. Mary repeated this mantra to the rhythm of her soles as they clacked against the cobblestone sidewalks, trying to ignore the wrong turn she had begun to suspect she'd made. That would need an extra 5 minutes. If only that drone weren't so close and making her nervous, she'd be able to course correct and make it home in time. She still had 7 minutes. That should be fine. A young girl, maybe 5 years old, looked out of the window, her eyes wide. Her mother pulled the girl away and sharply drew a curtain. Mary increased her pace. This brought the monitor drone down directly in front of her. Its headlights shined in Mary's face, almost blinding her. Jogging and running were, of course, discouraged at most times, but especially so close to curfew. This generally meant someone was headed where she shouldn't be. A red light flashed above the camera on the monitor drone, suggesting to Mary the drone was preparing to act. "I'm heading home," Mary yelled, hoping maybe this was one of the manned drones with a person on the other side, though she had heard could sometimes be reasoned with. The red light kept blinking, so Mary slowed back to a fast walk. The drone's light stopped and the small machine floated up a few feet above her. Mary turned a corner, coming out of the same block as her school. She was a few blocks further than she thought, but heading in the right direction. A soft buzzing sounded in her ear. She clicked her back molars together and her mother's voice came into her head. "How far are you?" "Not far, Mama. I'll make it, I'm sure." Mary started to jog again, bringing the monitor drone down next to her. A light flashed from its side and she heard a loud buzz. Her own drone clattered to the pavement, shattering into pieces. "You need to hurry, girl." Her mother's voice was strained, a mix between anger and fear. "I am hurrying. I just made a wrong turn." A whirring sound filled the air as a second monitor drone came next to Mary. "I have to go," she shouted, then clicked her teeth together again to end the call. Lights on the two drones flashed in unison. Mary was a brightly lit figure moving alone down a darkening road. "I'm just trying to get home," she said to the air, hoping again someone could hear her, someone could stop the drones. Mary started to run. Coming up the block, she could see her mother's silhouette in the open door of their house, a hand waving Mary on frantically. As Mary crossed the gravel road towards the figure, a siren sounded in the distance. Curfew was being called. Mary, only 2 yards away from her house, started to sprint when she heard a loud whoosh and felt a sharp sting in the back of her neck. She tried to keep her eyes focused on her mother in the doorway, but her feet buckled and she smashed against the ground. She heard someone yelling.